Welcome. I trust you are ready for a new mystery to unfold.
The Murder in the Boardroom, a Hercule Poirot mystery. Hello and welcome to Cozy Mysteries. I'm Stephen, and today I want to share with you a most extraordinary case that came to light during one of London's most tumultuous corporate battles. It was a case that would test even the renowned detective Hercule Poirot's legendary powers of observation. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. The rain drummed against the windows of Pemberton Industries' boardroom on that grey October morning, as if nature itself sensed the tension brewing within. The mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the faces of 7 individuals who had gathered for what would prove to be the most decisive meeting in the company's 50-year history. Sir Reginald Pemberton, the company's aging chairman, sat at the head of the table, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he arranged his papers. At 73, he had built Pemberton Industries from a modest textile firm into a manufacturing empire, but time and a series of poor investments had left the company vulnerable to a hostile takeover. The agenda was simple yet momentous: a vote on whether to accept the buyout offer from Blackwood Corporation, a decision that would either save the company or destroy its independence forever. Each director held a weighted vote based on their shareholding, and the outcome hung by the slenderest of threads. To Sir Reginald's right sat his nephew, James Pemberton, a sharp-faced man in his 40s, whose ambitious nature was barely concealed behind a veneer of family loyalty. As the largest shareholder after his uncle, James held significant sway over the proceedings. His vote alone could tip the balance. Margaret Whitmore, the company's formidable chief financial officer, occupied the chair to the chairman's left. Her steel-grey hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her calculating eyes missed nothing. She had been with the company for 25 years, working her way up from a junior accountant to one of the most powerful figures in the organization. Edmund Hayes, the chief technology officer, sat rigidly in his chair, his thick glasses reflecting the overhead lights. A brilliant innovator but poor businessman, he had developed several patents that made him indispensable to the company's future. His nervous habit of clicking his pen had already begun to irritate the other board members. Vivian Cross, the head of marketing, was the youngest person at the table. At 35, her vibrant red hair and confident demeanour masked a ruthless ambition that had propelled her to the top of her field. She had joined the company only 3 years ago, but had quickly made herself invaluable with her innovative campaigns. The 6th director was Thomas Aldrich, a silver-haired gentleman who served as the company's legal counsel. He had been Sir Reginald's friend for over 30 years, and his loyalty to both the man and the company was unquestioned. His weathered briefcase sat, open beside him, filled with contracts and legal documents. Finally, there was Catherine Hartwell, the company secretary, whose meticulous notes had recorded every board meeting for the past decade. Though she held the smallest voting share, her intimate knowledge of the company's operations made her opinion valuable to all present. Sir Reginald cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the tension-filled room. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know why we're here today. The Blackwood Corporation has made their final offer, $12 per share, significantly above market value. The deadline for our decision is noon today. James Pemberton leaned forward, his expensive suit immaculate despite the early hour. Uncle, with respect, we need to face reality. The company is hemorrhaging money, and this offer represents our best chance to preserve what's left of our shareholders' investments. Margaret Whitmore's voice cut through the air like a blade. Preserve investments or preserve your own position, James? We all know Blackwood has promised you the managing director role if this deal goes through. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. James's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Dr. Hayes spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. The patents. My research. Blackwood will shut down the innovation department. 20 years of work, gone. Vivian Cross tapped her manicured nails against the table. Edmund's sentiment won't pay the bills. We need to think practically about our future. As the debate intensified, none of them noticed the small figure who had been quietly observing from the gallery above. Hercule Poirot, the famous Belgian detective, had been invited by Sir Reginald himself to witness what the old man feared might be his final act as chairman. The storm outside grew stronger, and within the boardroom the battle for Pemberton Industries' soul was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 2. The Point of No Return. The tension in the boardroom continued to escalate as the morning wore on. Sir Reginald had called for a brief recess, during which the directors clustered in small groups, their whispered conversations creating an undercurrent of unease that permeated the elegant room. Hercule Poirot remained in his observation post, his keen eyes taking in every gesture, every glance, every subtle interaction between the board members. He had accepted Sir Reginald's invitation out of curiosity and old friendship, but now he sensed something more sinister brewing beneath the surface of corporate politics. Thomas Aldrich approached the chairman's chair, his weathered face creased with concern. "Reggie, are you certain about this? Once we start the formal voting process, there's no turning back." Sir Reginald nodded slowly, his hands still showing that slight tremor that seemed to worsen when he was under stress. "Tom, I've built this company from nothing. I won't see it dismantled by corporate vultures, not if I can help it." "But the numbers don't lie," Margaret Whitmore interjected, having overheard their conversation. "We're facing insolvency within 18 months if current trends continue. The Blackwood offer might be our only lifeline." James Pemberton rejoined the group, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. "Margaret's right, Uncle. We can't let pride cloud our judgment. This isn't just about you or the family name. We have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders." Dr. Hayes looked up from his papers, his thick glasses reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. "What about our duty to innovation, to progress? Blackwood will gut our research division and sell off our patents to the highest bidder." Vivian Cross, who had been quietly reviewing market reports on her tablet, finally spoke. "Edmund, your research is brilliant, but brilliance doesn't guarantee survival in today's market. We need to be realistic about our options." Catherine Hartwell had been taking meticulous notes throughout the morning, her pen moving in precise strokes across the page. She rarely spoke during board meetings, but when she did, her observations were always insightful. "The employees," she said quietly. "Has anyone considered what will happen to our 800 employees if Blackwood takes over?" The question hung in the air like an unwelcome ghost. Everyone knew that corporate takeovers typically meant significant layoffs, but no one wanted to voice that uncomfortable truth. Sir Reginald returned to his seat at the head of the table, his movements more laboured than usual. The stress of the situation seemed to be taking a physical toll on the elderly chairman. "Very well. Let's proceed with the formal vote. Each of you has received a ballot paper with the terms of the Blackwood offer clearly outlined," Poirot observed as each director examined their ballot. The papers were identical, each bearing the company letterhead and a simple proposition. "Do you vote to accept the Blackwood Corporation's acquisition offer of $12 per share?" Below were two boxes, one marked yes and one marked no, with a space for signatures. "The voting will be by secret ballot," Sir Reginald announced, his voice growing weaker. "Catherine will collect the ballots in 5 minutes, and I will announce the results immediately thereafter." Margaret Whitmore frowned. "Secret ballot, Reggie. That's highly irregular for a board of this size. Typically, we vote openly." "The circumstances are hardly typical, Margaret," Thomas Aldrich replied. "Given the personal nature of some of the accusations that have been made today, a secret ballot seems prudent." James Pemberton shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I still think we should discuss this further. There might be alternatives we haven't considered." "Such as?" Vivian Cross asked pointedly. "We've been over the numbers a dozen times. Unless someone has a miracle investor hidden in their back pocket, Blackwood is our only viable option." Dr. Hayes suddenly looked up from his ballot, an expression of confusion on his face. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be an issue with my pen. The ink doesn't appear to be flowing properly." Catherine Hartwell immediately opened her briefcase and produced a handful of identical black pens. "Here, I always carry extras for situations like this." As she distributed the pens around the table, Poirot noticed something curious. Each director received an identical pen, but he observed that Margaret Whitmore and James Pemberton both declined, preferring to use their own expensive fountain pens. The room fell silent as each director contemplated their decision. Outside, the storm had intensified, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the grey sky. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. They were all acutely aware that they stood at a crossroads that would determine not only their own futures but the fate of hundreds of employees and thousands of shareholders. Sir Reginald looked around the table one final time. Very well. If there are no further questions, please mark your ballots and prepare to submit them. The sound of pens scratching against paper filled the room, each director wrestling with what would prove to be one of the most consequential decisions of their careers. Chapter 3. The Fatal Mark. The scratching of pens against paper created an almost musical rhythm in the tense boardroom. Each director bent over their ballot, some writing quickly and decisively, others pausing to reconsider their choice one final time. From his vantage point above, Hercule Poirot observed the subtle body language of each participant. Margaret Whitmore wrote with sharp, efficient strokes, her decision apparently made long before the formal voting began. James Pemberton hesitated, his pen hovering over the paper before finally making his mark with what appeared to be reluctant determination. Dr. Hayes adjusted his glasses nervously before writing, while Vivian Cross checked her tablet one final time before completing her ballot. Thomas Aldrich wrote slowly and deliberately, the weight of his long friendship with Sir Reginald evident in every careful movement. Catherine Hartwell completed her ballot with the same meticulous precision she applied to everything else. Sir Reginald himself had not yet marked his ballot. The chairman sat motionless at the head of the table, staring at the paper before him, as if it contained some hidden message. His hands trembled more noticeably now, and a thin sheen of perspiration had appeared on his forehead despite the room's comfortable temperature. "Uncle," James Pemberton ventured quietly, "are you feeling all right?" Sir Reginald looked up, his eyes appearing slightly unfocused. Yes, of course. Just considering the gravity of the moment." He picked up his pen with visibly shaking hands and began to write. It was then that something extraordinary happened. As Sir Reginald completed his signature, he suddenly gasped and clutched at his chest. The pen fell from his fingers, leaving a small ink blot on the pristine white paper as he slumped forward onto the table. "Reggie!" Thomas Aldrich cried out, immediately rushing to his friend's side. The other directors rose from their chairs in alarm, the formal proceedings forgotten in the face of the medical emergency. Margaret Whitmore, with her characteristic efficiency, immediately called for an ambulance, while Dr. Hayes, despite his field being technology rather than medicine, attempted to check for vital signs. Catherine Hartwell began gathering the scattered papers, her secretary's instincts taking over even in the crisis. "Is he breathing?" Vivian Cross asked, her usual composure shattered by the sudden turn of events. Thomas Aldrich looked up gravely. I'm afraid he's gone." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Sir Reginald Pemberton, the man who had built an empire from nothing, who had weathered economic storms and corporate battles for half a century, had died at the moment of his company's greatest crisis. James Pemberton stood frozen, his face pale with shock. But he was fine this morning, a little tired perhaps, but— "Heart attack, most likely," Dr. Hayes said quietly. The stress of today's proceedings must have been overwhelming for a man his age. From his position above, Poirot had observed everything with his characteristic attention to detail. The sudden collapse, the scattered papers, the reactions of each board member, all of it registered in his remarkable mind. But something bothered him, something he couldn't quite identify. The paramedics arrived within minutes, followed closely by the police, as was standard procedure for any sudden death in a corporate setting. Detective Inspector Williams, a competent if unimaginative officer, took charge of the scene. "I'll need statements from all of you," Williams announced to the shock directors. "This appears to be a natural death, but we need to document everything properly." As the detective began his interviews, Poirot quietly descended from the gallery and approached the scene. The ballot papers had been scattered when Sir Reginald collapsed, and Catherine Hartwell was carefully collecting them under the watchful eye of a police constable. "A tragic end to what was already a difficult day," Poirot murmured to Thomas Aldrich, who stood beside his deceased friend's body. The lawyer nodded grimly. "Poor Reggie. The irony is that he probably would have won the vote. James and Margaret were pushing for the takeover, but I think the others were leaning toward rejecting it." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "You think Sir Reginald would have voted against the takeover?" "Absolutely. He was prepared to fight Blackwood to his last breath." Thomas paused, the unfortunate choice of words not lost on him. He believed the company could weather this storm, given time. As the police completed their preliminary investigation and the body was removed, Poirot found himself troubled by a nagging sense that something was amiss. The timing of Sir Reginald's death seemed almost too convenient, occurring at the precise moment when his vote could have determined the company's fate. But it was when he glimpsed one of the ballot papers that his suspicions crystallized into certainty. There, on the white paper, was not just the expected ink mark of Sir Reginald's interrupted signature, but something else, a small telltale stain that spoke of careful planning and calculated murder. The great detective's mind began to work with its familiar precision, analyzing every detail of the morning's events. Someone in that boardroom was a killer, and Poirot intended to prove it. Chapter 4. Secrets in the Shadows. The boardroom had been cleared of all but the essential personnel. Detective Inspector Williams continued his methodical interviews while the coroner's team completed their preliminary examination of Sir Reginald's body. The atmosphere was thick with grief, shock, and something else, an undercurrent of fear that Hercule Poirot recognized all too well. He positioned himself near the windows, seemingly absorbed in watching the storm outside, but his attention was entirely focused on the conversations taking place around him. Each word, each gesture, each nervous glance was catalogued in his remarkable memory. James Pemberton sat slumped in his chair, his earlier composure completely shattered. "I can't believe he's gone," he murmured to Margaret Whitmore, who had taken the seat beside him. "We've had our differences, but he was family." Margaret's response was characteristically pragmatic. "The company will need strong leadership now more than ever. The Blackwood offer doesn't disappear just because—" She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Dr. Hayes had removed his glasses and was cleaning them obsessively, a nervous habit that seemed to intensify under stress. "His death changes everything," he said to Catherine Hartwell, who was organizing papers with mechanical precision. "The vote becomes meaningless now." Catherine looked up from her work. "Actually, Edmund, that's not necessarily true. The company bylaws have provisions for situations like this. The board can still proceed with the vote if they choose to." Vivian Cross, who had been unusually quiet since the tragedy, suddenly spoke up. "How can you even think about business at a time like this? A man is dead." "A man is dead," Thomas Aldrich agreed grimly. "But the company survives. 800 employees are counting on us to make the right decision. We can't let sentiment cloud our judgment, no matter how difficult this is." Poirot observed the interplay of emotions and motivations with growing interest. Each person in the room had a stake in the outcome of the vote, and Sir Reginald's death had dramatically altered the balance of power. Detective Inspector Williams approached the small group. "I'll need to examine all the documents on the table, including the ballot papers. This is purely routine, you understand." Catherine Hartwell handed over the collected ballots. "They're all here, Inspector. Sir Reginald's is incomplete, of course, but the others—" She hesitated. "The others, what, Miss Hartwell?" Williams prompted. "Well, it's just that we hadn't actually cast the votes yet when Sir Reginald collapsed. These ballots were marked but not officially submitted." Poirot's ears perked up at this information. He approached the detective with his characteristic diplomatic manner. "Inspector Williams, if I might be permitted to observe, I was present as Sir Reginald's guest, and I have had some experience with unusual circumstances." Williams recognized the famous detective and nodded grudgingly. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot, though I'm sure this is simply a tragic case of natural causes." "Undoubtedly," Poirot agreed, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Nevertheless, these ballot papers are quite interesting. May I?" He examined each ballot carefully, his sharp eyes noting every detail. 6 of the 7 papers were properly completed, each bearing a clear vote and a signature. Sir Reginald's ballot was different. His pen had fallen mid-signature, leaving an incomplete mark, and that curious ink stain that had first caught Poirot's attention. "Most interesting," he murmured. "The ink distribution on Sir Reginald's paper suggests that the pen was not simply dropped, but rather—" "Rather what?" Williams asked impatiently. "Nothing conclusive yet, mon ami. But perhaps we might examine the pens that were used." Catherine Hartwell produced the handful of identical black pens she had distributed earlier. I gave these to anyone who needed them. Some directors preferred to use their own pens. Poirot picked up each pen in turn, testing the ink flow on a separate piece of paper. 5 of the pens wrote normally, but the 6th produced an unusual result. The ink flowed far too freely, creating blotches and smears. "Ah," Poirot said softly, "this is most illuminating." Thomas Aldrich, who had been watching the examination closely, frowned. "What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot? That someone tampered with the pens?" "I suggest nothing yet, Monsieur Aldrich. I merely observe. Facts have a way of telling their own story, if one knows how to listen." James Pemberton looked up sharply. "Are you implying that my uncle was murdered? That's impossible. We all saw what happened. He had a heart attack." "Heart attacks can have many causes," Poirot replied diplomatically. "Some natural, some less so." The implications of his words sent a chill through the room. Margaret Whitmore's face had gone pale, while Dr. Hayes fumbled with his glasses again. Vivian Cross moved closer to the window, as if seeking escape from the suddenly oppressive atmosphere. It was Catherine Hartwell who voiced what everyone was thinking. "If someone murdered Sir Reginald, then one of us—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Is a killer," Poirot completed gently. "Oui, mademoiselle. That is precisely what I am beginning to suspect." Detective Inspector Williams looked sceptical but intrigued. "What evidence do you have to support such a theory?" Poirot smiled enigmatically. "Evidence, Inspector, comes in many forms. Sometimes it is what we see, and sometimes it is what we do not see. In this case, I believe our killer has made one small but fatal error." He held up Sir Reginald's ballot paper, pointing to the unusual ink stain. "This mark tells a story, mes amis, and before this day is over, I intend to make our murderer confess to their crime." Chapter 5. The Web of Motives. The atmosphere in the boardroom had transformed from corporate tension to something far more sinister. Each director now looked at their colleagues with suspicion, wondering who among them might be capable of murder. Detective Inspector Williams had ordered that no one leave until the investigation was complete, effectively turning the elegant room into an impromptu prison. Hercule Poirot began his own investigation with characteristic methodicalness. He approached each board member individually, his questions seemingly casual, but each one carefully designed to reveal hidden truths. "Monsieur James," he began, settling into the chair beside the younger Pemberton, "your uncle's death must be particularly difficult for you, given your family relationship." James looked haggard, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "Uncle Reggie raised me after my parents died. He was like a father to me. The fact that we disagreed about the company's future, it's eating me alive." "You supported the Blackwood takeover quite strongly," Poirot observed gently. "Because it was the practical choice." James's voice rose. Then he caught himself and lowered it. "Uncle Reggie was brilliant, but he was also stubborn. He couldn't see that his emotional attachment to the company was clouding his business judgment. And with his death, the balance of power shifts considerably." James stared at him. "Are you suggesting I killed my own uncle for control of the company? That's monstrous." Poirot's expression remained neutral. "I suggest nothing, monsieur. I merely observe that circumstances have changed dramatically." Next, he approached Margaret Whitmore, who was reviewing financial documents with her usual intensity. "Madame Whitmore, your position as CFO gives you unique insight into the company's true financial state." She looked up sharply. "If you're asking whether the company is in serious trouble, the answer is yes. Sir Reginald's optimism was admirable, but it wasn't based in financial reality. You have been with the company for 25 years. That represents considerable loyalty." "Loyalty doesn't pay creditors, monsieur." "Poirot! Sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is tell difficult truths, even when they're unwelcome." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And you stood to gain significantly from the Blackwood takeover, did you not? A substantial severance package, plus a consulting position with the new organization." Margaret's eyes flashed. "I worked for everything I've achieved in this company. If that makes me a suspect in your mind, so be it." Dr. Hayes proved to be the most nervous of the directors when Poirot approached him. The technology officer kept adjusting his glasses and clicking his pen, the same nervous habits that had been evident all morning. Your research patents are quite valuable, I understand, Poirot began conversationally. 20 years of work, Hayes replied. Innovations that could revolutionize manufacturing processes. Blackwood would simply sell them off to recover their investment. That must create considerable pressure for you. Hayes nodded miserably. Sir Reginald was the only one who truly understood the potential of my work. With him gone, he shrugged helplessly. You used one of Miss Hartwell's pens today, did you not? Yes. Mine wasn't working properly. Fortunate that Catherine always comes prepared. Poirot made a mental note of this response before moving on to Vivian Cross. The marketing director had regained some of her composure, but there was still an underlying tension in her manner. You joined the company relatively recently, Poirot observed, yet you quickly rose to a position of significant influence. I'm good at what I do, Vivian replied simply. Sir Reginald recognized talent when he saw it. And yet you supported the takeover, despite owing your position to Sir Reginald's faith in you. Vivian's jaw tightened. Business is business, Monsieur Poirot. Personal relationships can't override financial realities. Thomas Aldrich presented a different challenge. As both the company's legal counsel and Sir Reginald's oldest friend, his grief appeared genuine and deep. Reggie and I built this company together, he said when Poirot approached him. I can't imagine it without him. You opposed the takeover as strongly as he did. Of course I did. Blackwood would gut everything we've worked for. They're not interested in preserving the company's legacy. They just want to asset strip and move on. With Sir Reginald gone, your position becomes more difficult. You no longer have his support for opposing the deal. Thomas's face hardened. Are you suggesting I had something to gain from my best friend's death? That's outrageous. Finally, Poirot spoke with Catherine Hartwell, whose meticulous nature had made her an invaluable company secretary. You have observed these directors closely for many years, he said. You must have insights into their true motivations. Catherine considered her words carefully. Sir Reginald was a good man, but he wasn't perfect. The company has been struggling, and difficult decisions needed to be made. You distributed the pens today. An interesting coincidence that one of them should malfunction at such a crucial moment. I always carry extra supplies. It's part of my job to be prepared for any eventuality. Including murder? Poirot asked quietly. Catherine's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. But Poirot had seen the flash of fear in her eyes, and his suspicions began to crystallize. The killer was in this room, and he was beginning to understand exactly how the crime had been committed. Detective Inspector Williams approached him. Any luck with your interviews, Monsieur Poirot? Indeed, Inspector. I believe I am beginning to see the pattern. Our killer is clever, but not quite clever enough. They have made one crucial error, and that error will expose them. Williams looked skeptical. And what error is that? Poirot smiled mysteriously. All will be revealed shortly, mon ami. But first, I need to conduct one final experiment. Chapter 6. The Chemistry of Death. Detective Inspector Williams had grown increasingly impatient with Poirot's methodical approach, but the Belgian detective remained focused on the crucial details that others had overlooked. He requested that all the pens used during the voting be collected and examined more thoroughly. Inspector, Poirot said, studying the implements under a magnifying glass he had produced from his waistcoat pocket, I wonder if we might have these tested for unusual substances. Substances? What sort of substances? Williams asked. That remains to be determined, but I have a theory about how our killer managed to commit murder in a room full of witnesses, without anyone suspecting a thing. Dr. Hayes, overhearing this conversation, approached nervously. Monsieur Poirot, I couldn't help but notice your interest in the pens. As someone with a background in chemistry, my patents involve chemical processes. I might be able to assist. Poirot's eyes lit up with interest. Oh, Dr. Hayes, that is most helpful. Tell me, what chemical substances might cause a rapid cardiac episode in an elderly man? Hayes shifted uncomfortably. Well, there are several. Digitalis in high concentrations, certain alkaloids, even some industrial chemicals we use in our manufacturing processes. And how might such substances be administered without the victim's knowledge? Absorption through the skin is possible with certain compounds. Some chemicals can penetrate the skin barrier quite rapidly, especially if the skin is warm or if there's moisture present. Margaret Whitmore had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. "Are you seriously suggesting that someone poisoned Sir Reginald through his pen? That sounds like something from a detective novel." "Truth, madame, is often stranger than fiction," Poirot replied. "But let us consider the sequence of events. Sir Reginald was under considerable stress, which would have increased his heart rate and caused perspiration. His hands were trembling, which would have increased his contact with any substance on the pen, and he was elderly, making him more susceptible to cardiac episodes." Thomas Aldrich looked horrified. "But that would mean someone deliberately tampered with a pen knowing Reggie would use it. How could they be certain?" Catherine Hartwell spoke up quietly. "Sir Reginald always used the same pen, a gold fountain pen that had been a gift from his late wife. But this morning, when he reached for it—" She paused, her face pale. "Yes?" Poirot prompted gently. "It wasn't working. He mentioned that the ink cartridge seemed to be empty. I offered him one of the spare pens I always carry." The implications of this revelation sent a chill through the room. Someone had deliberately sabotaged Sir Reginald's regular pen, forcing him to use one of the spares. "Which pen did you give him?" Poirot asked. Catherine's hands trembled as she reached into her briefcase. "This one, I think. Yes, this is the one he was using when he—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Poirot examined the pen carefully. Unlike the others, this one showed signs of having been opened and reassembled. "Most interesting. This pen has been modified." Detective Inspector Williams finally grasped the significance of what they were discovering. If someone poisoned the pen, then we're dealing with premeditated murder. But who had access to tamper with it? James Pemberton looked around the room with growing suspicion. Anyone could have done it. We all have access to the building, and Catherine's briefcase was left unattended during our coffee break. "Not anyone," Poirot corrected gently. "Our killer needed specific knowledge. They had to know about Sir Reginald's pen habits. They had to understand enough chemistry to select an appropriate poison, and they had to have the skill to modify a pen without leaving obvious traces." Dr. Hayes was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Monsieur Poirot, you're making some very serious implications. If you're suggesting that I suggest nothing yet, Doctor, but you have confirmed that such a murder would be technically feasible." Vivian Cross had been unusually quiet during this discussion, but now she spoke up. "There's something else we should consider. Whoever did this had to be absolutely certain that Sir Reginald would use the poisoned pen. That suggests they knew about his regular pen being sabotaged." Thomas Aldrich nodded grimly. "Which means they either sabotaged it themselves, or they had an accomplice." The web of suspicion was tightening around the group. Each director now looked at their colleagues with fear and distrust, wondering who among them was capable of such calculated evil. Detective Inspector Williams made a decision. "I'm calling in a forensics team to examine everything. The pens, the papers, even the coffee cups. If there's evidence of poison, we'll find it." Poirot nodded approvingly. "An excellent decision, Inspector. But while we wait for the scientific confirmation, perhaps we might consider the question of motive. Our killer had to have a very compelling reason to risk everything on this dangerous gamble." He looked around the room, his keen eyes studying each face. "The question is not just who could have committed this crime, but who benefited most from Sir Reginald's death at this precise moment." The answer to that question, he suspected, would reveal the killer's identity. But first, he needed to understand exactly how the crime had been committed and why the killer had chosen this particular method. The net was closing, and soon there would be nowhere left for the murderer to hide. Chapter 7. The Stain That Betrays. The forensics team arrived within the hour, transforming the elegant boardroom into a crime scene laboratory. Poirot watched with interest as they dusted for fingerprints, collected samples, and photographed everything with meticulous care. But his attention remained focused on the one piece of evidence that had first aroused his suspicions, the peculiar ink stain on Sir Reginald's ballot paper. "Inspector Williams," he called softly, "might I direct your attention to this marking?" The detective approached, followed by several of the board members who were growing increasingly anxious about the investigation's direction. Poirot pointed to the incomplete ballot. "Observe the pattern of the ink. Sir Reginald was in the process of signing his name when he collapsed, oui? But look here, There is not simply the expected trail where the pen fell from his fingers. There is also this unusual splotch, quite distinct from the signature attempt. Dr. Hayes adjusted his glasses to peer at the paper. I see what you mean. The ink distribution doesn't match what you'd expect from a simple dropped pen. Precisely, Doctor. This suggests that before Sir Reginald collapsed, the pen had already begun to leak, or discharge its contents in an unusual manner. Margaret Whitmore frowned. Are you saying the pen was defective? I'm saying, madame, that the pen was deliberately altered to discharge more than just ink. The forensics photographer had been documenting everything, and now she approached with her camera's display screen. Monsieur Poirot, you might find this interesting. Under enhanced lighting, the stain shows some unusual properties. The image on the screen revealed that the ink stain had an almost iridescent quality under certain light conditions, suggesting the presence of substances beyond normal ink. Catherine Hartwell had grown very pale during this examination. I don't understand, she said weakly. They were just ordinary pens from my supply box. Were they, mademoiselle? Poirot asked gently. Or had someone perhaps switched one of your ordinary pens for a specially prepared one? Thomas Aldrich was studying the evidence with the sharp eye of a legal mind. If someone did tamper with the pen, they would have needed access to Catherine's briefcase. When would that have been possible? During our coffee break, James Pemberton said immediately. We all left the room for about 15 minutes. Anyone could have accessed the briefcase then. Not quite anyone, Poirot corrected. Our killer needed to know which pen Sir Reginald would be likely to choose. They also needed to ensure that his regular pen would be unavailable, forcing him to request a replacement. Vivian Cross had been following the logic carefully. That suggests our killer had intimate knowledge of Sir Reginald's habits. Not just anyone would know about his preference for that particular gold fountain pen. An astute observation, Mademoiselle Cross, Poirot agreed. Our murderer is someone who had observed Sir Reginald closely over a considerable period. The forensics technician examining the pen suddenly looked up. I'm getting some interesting readings here. This pen, she held up the one Catherine had given to Sir Reginald, shows traces of an organic compound that definitely isn't standard ink. Detective Inspector Williams leaned forward eagerly. What kind of compound? I'll need to run more detailed tests, but it appears to be some sort of alkaloid derivative, potentially very dangerous if absorbed through the skin. Dr. Hayes went even paler than before. Alkaloids? That could certainly cause cardiac distress in an elderly person, especially under stress. Poirot's attention was drawn to a small detail that others had missed. On the table beside Sir Reginald's chair, there was a nearly empty water glass. Inspector, might your team test this glass as well? Of course, but why? Because our killer needed to ensure the poison would be absorbed quickly and efficiently. The moisture on the hands would facilitate that absorption. As the forensics team worked, Poirot began to pace slowly around the room, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. He paused at each chair, examining the papers and personal items left behind by the board members. It was at Catherine Hartwell's place that he made his crucial discovery. Hidden beneath a stack of meeting minutes, almost invisible unless one was looking for it specifically, was a small cloth, the kind used for cleaning eyeglasses or delicate instruments. But this cloth bore traces of the same unusual ink stain that had appeared on Sir Reginald's ballot. Mademoiselle Hartwell, Poirot said quietly, might I ask about this cloth? Catherine's reaction was immediate and telling. Her face flushed, then went deathly pale. I don't know how that got there. Don't you? I think you do. I think you used this cloth to clean the poison from your fingers after you tampered with the pen. You thought you had disposed of it, but in the confusion following Sir Reginald's collapse, it became mixed with your papers. The room fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the forensics equipment. All eyes were on Catherine, who seemed to shrink into herself under the weight of their stares. That's impossible, James Pemberton stammered. Catherine would never. She's been with the company for years. 10 years, to be precise, Poirot said softly. 10 years of watching Sir Reginald's stubborn decisions slowly destroy the company she had grown to love. 10 years of seeing opportunities missed and finances mismanaged. Margaret Whitmore was staring at Catherine with a mixture of shock and understanding. The severance packages, she whispered. If the Blackwood deal went through, Catherine would have received almost nothing. Her length of service wasn't quite enough to qualify for the full benefits. But, with Sir Reginald dead, Thomas Aldrich continued the thought, his legal mind grasping the implications, and the vote swinging toward the takeover, she would have been seen as instrumental in facilitating the deal. Blackwood would have offered her a position with the new organisation. Catherine Hartwell finally looked up, her eyes filled with tears but also with a steely determination. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch everything you've worked for slowly crumble? To see a man you once respected make decision after disastrous decision? So, you decided to take matters into your own hands, Poirot observed. You sabotaged Sir Reginald's fountain pen to ensure he would need a replacement. You prepared a pen with contact poison, knowing his habits well enough to predict he would grip it tightly due to his tremor. The stress of the vote would ensure rapid absorption. You're guessing, Catherine said desperately. You can't prove any of this. Can I not? Poirot smiled sadly. The forensics will confirm the poison on the pen, and on your cleaning cloth. But even without that, your knowledge betrays you. You knew exactly which pen Sir Reginald had used, because you prepared it specifically for him. You attempted to destroy the evidence by washing your hands, but you forgot about the cloth you used to clean them. Detective Inspector Williams stepped forward with his handcuffs. Catherine Hartwell, I'm arresting you for the murder of Sir Reginald Pemberton. As the handcuffs clicked shut, Catherine's composure finally cracked completely. He was going to destroy everything, she sobbed. 50 years of history, 800 jobs, all because he was too proud to admit he was wrong. The boardroom fell silent as the implications of her confession sank in. In trying to save the company, Catherine Hartwell had destroyed herself and taken the life of the man who had trusted her implicitly. Chapter 8. The Unravelling Truth. The confession of Catherine Hartwell sent shockwaves through the remaining board members, but Detective Inspector Williams needed more than her emotional outburst to build a solid case. Hercule Poirot, understanding this necessity, began to methodically reconstruct the crime for the benefit of both the police and the stunned directors. If I may, Poirot began, settling into his chair with the air of a professor addressing students, I would like to explain exactly how this tragic crime was planned and executed. The remaining board members gathered around, their faces showing a mixture of fascination and horror. Catherine sat in handcuffs, her earlier defiance replaced by resigned acceptance of her fate. Our killer faced a significant challenge, Poirot continued. How does one commit murder in a room full of witnesses without detection? The answer lay in understanding both the victim's habits and the nature of the corporate environment. He gestured towards Sir Reginald's empty chair. Mademoiselle Hartwell knew that Sir Reginald always used his gold fountain pen for important documents. She also knew that he suffered from a tremor that worsened under stress, causing him to grip his pen tightly. Dr. Hayes, despite his obvious discomfort at being part of this analysis, couldn't help but follow the logic. So she sabotaged his regular pen to force him to use one of her spares. Precisely. But the preparation of the murder weapon required considerable sophistication. Tell me, Mademoiselle Hartwell, where did you acquire your knowledge of contact poisons? Catherine looked up with hollow eyes. My late husband was a chemist. He worked for a pharmaceutical company before he died. I kept some of his reference books. Ah, yes. I wondered about your expertise. You selected a compound that would absorb through the skin rapidly, especially given the moisture from perspiration and the increased contact from Sir Reginald's tremor. Margaret Whitmore was following the explanation with professional interest. But how could she be certain the timing would work? The vote could have been delayed, or Sir Reginald might not have used the pen immediately. An excellent question, Madame Whitmore. Our killer had to ensure that several factors aligned perfectly. First, Sir Reginald's regular pen had to fail at the crucial moment. Second, the stress of the vote had to be at its peak to ensure rapid absorption and maximum cardiac impact. Third, she had to be present to offer the poisoned pen at exactly the right moment. Thomas Aldrich shook his head in amazement. The precision required. It's almost impossible to believe. Not impossible, merely very risky. Our killer gambled everything on her intimate knowledge of the victim and the situation. But she made several crucial errors. Poirot stood and walked to the evidence table, where the forensics team had laid out their findings. First, she underestimated the amount of poison that would transfer to the ballot paper. The unusual ink stain was what first drew my attention. He picked up the stained cloth that had been found among Catherine's papers. Second, she forgot to dispose of this cleaning cloth immediately. In the chaos following Sir Reginald's collapse, it became mixed with her official papers. And third, Detective Inspector Williams prompted, third, and most damning, she revealed knowledge she should not have possessed. When I asked about which pen Sir Reginald had used, she knew immediately because she had prepared it specifically for him. James Pemberton looked at Catherine with a mixture of anger and pity. But why, Catherine? Why not just resign if you disagreed with Uncle Reggie's decisions? Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. Because I couldn't bear to watch him destroy everything we'd all worked for. The Blackwood deal wasn't perfect, but it would have saved jobs, preserved some of the company's legacy. His pride was going to kill Pemberton Industries. So you killed him instead, Vivian Cross said flatly. I didn't mean for it to happen so quickly, Catherine sobbed. I thought it would take longer, that he might just become ill during the vote. I never intended. You never intended to be caught, Poirot corrected gently. But murder, mademoiselle, is not a precise science. There are always variables that cannot be controlled. The forensics technician approached with her final report. Inspector, we've confirmed the presence of a concentrated alkaloid compound on the pen, the cleaning cloth, and the ballot paper. The substance would have been rapidly absorbed through skin contact and could easily have caused cardiac arrest in an elderly person under stress. Detective Inspector Williams nodded grimly. That should be sufficient for the Crown Prosecution Service. Catherine Hartwell, you'll be formally charged with the murder of Sir Reginald Pemberton. As Catherine was led away, the remaining board members sat in stunned silence. The corporate crisis that had brought them together that morning seemed almost trivial compared to the human tragedy that had unfolded. Thomas Aldrich was the first to speak. What happens now? To the company, I mean? Margaret Whitmore consulted her notes. The vote never officially took place. Under the bylaws, we'll need to reconvene with the remaining directors to make a decision about the Blackwood offer. Without Uncle Reggie's voice in the matter, James added quietly. Dr. Hayes removed his glasses and cleaned them absently. Perhaps we can find a third option, something between capitulation and stubborn resistance. Poirot gathered his coat and hat, preparing to leave the scene of tragedy. It is not for me to advise on corporate matters, he said diplomatically, but I would observe that Mademoiselle Hartwell's crime was born from the belief that she knew better than others what was right. Perhaps the lesson here is that reasonable people can disagree without resorting to such extremes. As he reached the door, Thomas Aldrich called after him, Monsieur Poirot, thank you for your thoroughness. Without your attention to detail, we might never have known the truth. Poirot paused, his hand on the doorknob. The truth, Monsieur Aldrich, has a way of revealing itself. Sometimes it simply needs a little assistance. Chapter 9. The Weight of Justice. 3 weeks after the arrest of Catherine Hartwell, Hercule Poirot sat in his comfortable London apartment, reading the morning newspapers with his customary precision. The Pemberton Industries case had generated considerable media attention, not just for the shocking nature of the crime, but for the complex corporate drama that had provided its backdrop. His contemplation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson, his long-suffering landlady, announced that Detective Inspector Williams had come to call. Monsieur Poirot, Williams said as he settled into the offered chair. I thought you'd want to know that Catherine Hartwell's case went to trial yesterday. The jury took less than 2 hours to reach their verdict. Guilty, I presume? Guilty of murder in the first degree. The forensic evidence was overwhelming and her confession sealed her fate. She'll spend the rest of her life in prison. Poirot nodded solemnly. A tragic end to what was once a promising career. And what of Pemberton Industries? Did the board ultimately decide on the Blackwood offer? Williams consulted his notebook. Interesting development there. They rejected the Blackwood takeover but negotiated a strategic partnership instead. James Pemberton was elected as the new chairman, and he's implementing a restructuring plan that Margaret Whitmore developed. And the company's future? Too early to tell, but the initial market response has been positive. Seems like they found a middle path between Sir Reginald's stubborn independence and complete capitulation to Blackwood. Poirot sipped his tisane thoughtfully. Perhaps some good can come from this tragedy after all, though the price was far too high. Williams leaned forward with obvious curiosity. I have to ask, Monsieur Poirot, when did you first suspect Catherine Hartwell? Mon ami, that is an interesting question. The truth is, I suspected everyone and no one in those first moments. But the ink stain on Sir Reginald's ballot paper was what we call a clue. Material, physical evidence that could not be explained by the official version of events. But surely others could have prepared the poisoned pen. Indeed, but you must consider the totality of the evidence. Who had the necessary knowledge of chemistry? Who had access to Sir Reginald's habits and routines? Who could sabotage his fountain pen without detection? Who was in the perfect position to offer a replacement at exactly the right moment? Williams counted on his fingers. Dr. Hayes had the chemical knowledge, but he genuinely seemed to mourn Sir Reginald's death. James Pemberton had motive, but lacked the technical expertise. Margaret Whitmore was practical enough, but she had already achieved her goals through legitimate corporate manoeuvring. Exactly. Process of elimination combined with careful observation of behaviour. Catherine Hartwell was the only person who possessed all the necessary elements: means, motive, opportunity, and the insider knowledge required to execute such a precise crime. The cleaning cloth was what convinced the jury, I think. That and her confession. Poirot shook his head sadly. The confession was inevitable once she realised the forensic evidence would expose her. But the cleaning cloth, that was indeed her fatal error in her planning. She had considered how to prepare the weapon and how to ensure the victim would use it, but she had not fully thought through the aftermath. In what way? She had poison on her hands after handling the prepared pen. Non? She needed to clean them to avoid accidentally poisoning herself. But in the chaos following Sir Reginald's collapse, she forgot to properly dispose of the evidence of that cleaning. Williams made notes as Poirot spoke. It's remarkable how often criminals are undone by small oversights rather than major flaws in their plans. C'est vrai. The human mind, even a clever one, cannot anticipate every variable. This is why murder is ultimately a fool's gambit. There are always too many factors beyond one's control. Their conversation was interrupted by another visitor. Thomas Aldrich had come to thank Poirot personally for his role in solving the case. Monsieur Poirot, the lawyer said warmly, I wanted to express my gratitude, not just for exposing Catherine's crime, but for the manner in which you conducted your investigation. You treated everyone with dignity, even when revealing their guilt. Merci, Monsieur Aldrich. And how are the remaining board members coping with the aftermath? Better than expected, actually. James has thrown himself into his new role as chairman with remarkable energy. Margaret is proving invaluable as his advisor, and Dr. Hayes seems reinvigorated by the company's new direction. Even Vivian Cross has contributed some innovative marketing strategies for the partnership with Blackwood. And the employees, the 800 people whose fate hung in the balance. Most will keep their jobs, though there will be some restructuring. The irony is that Catherine's crime accomplished part of what she wanted. The company will survive, though not in the way she envisioned. Poirot reflected on this observation. It is often the case that extreme actions produce unintended consequences. Had she been patient, she might have seen her goals achieved through legitimate means. Do you think she truly believed she was acting for the greater good? Williams asked. I believe she convinced herself of that, but beneath the rationalization was wounded pride and personal desperation. She saw her own future threatened and dressed her self-interest in noble rhetoric. Thomas Aldrich nodded grimly. Power corrupts, as they say, even the power of a trusted secretary who knows everyone's secrets and habits. Precisely. Catherine Hartwell had spent years observing, noting, cataloguing the behaviour of others. When she decided to act, she used that accumulated knowledge as a weapon. The three men sat in contemplative silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about the case and its implications. Finally, Williams spoke again. One last question, Monsieur Poirot. If you hadn't been present at the board meeting, Do you think Catherine would have escaped justice? Poirot considered this carefully. Perhaps the forensic evidence would eventually have emerged, but without someone specifically looking for signs of foul play, Sir Reginald's death might well have been accepted as natural. Catherine's plan was sophisticated enough that it might have succeeded. Then Pemberton Industries owes you a considerable debt. None, Inspector. Justice owes no one anything. It simply is, or it is not. My role was merely to help it emerge from the shadows. Chapter 10. The Final Reckoning. 6 months after the conviction of Catherine Hartwell, Hercule Poirot received an unexpected invitation to visit the offices of Pemberton Industries. The company had not only survived the crisis, but had begun to show signs of renewed prosperity under James Pemberton's leadership and the strategic partnership with Blackwood Corporation. The boardroom where Sir Reginald had died had been completely renovated. Gone was the heavy mahogany table with its tragic associations, replaced by a modern conference setup that spoke of renewal and forward thinking. James Pemberton, now bearing the full weight of chairmanship, greeted Poirot with genuine warmth. Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming. I wanted to show you what we've accomplished since that terrible day. The other surviving board members were also present, and Poirot was struck by how the tragedy had transformed them all. Margaret Whitmore, now serving as deputy chairman, had shed much of her earlier coldness and seemed more collaborative in her approach. Dr. Hayes appeared more confident, his nervous habits replaced by an air of purposeful engagement. Even Vivian Cross seemed more grounded, less driven by pure ambition. We wanted you to know, James continued, that the partnership with Blackwood has preserved not only the company but also our research division. Edmund's patents are being developed jointly, and we've been able to retain nearly all our employees. Dr. Hayes nodded enthusiastically. It's everything I hoped for, but never expected. The new resources have allowed us to accelerate development on several promising projects. Thomas Aldrich, still serving as legal counsel despite his grief over his friend's death, added, We've also established the Reginald Pemberton Foundation for Corporate Ethics. It seemed appropriate to honour his memory while acknowledging the lessons we learned from this tragedy. Poirot accepted their gratitude graciously, but his keen mind was more interested in understanding how the individuals had processed their experience. And what of Mademoiselle Hartwell? Do any of you maintain contact with her? The question brought a sobering silence to the room. Margaret Whitmore finally answered. She writes occasionally to some of us. Prison has given her time to reflect on what she did. Her letters are, well, they're filled with regret. She asks about the company. Whether her sacrifice, that's how she still thinks of it, achieved anything worthwhile, Vivian Cross added quietly. And how do you respond to such questions? Poirot asked. James Pemberton looked uncomfortable. We don't respond at all. It seemed inappropriate. She murdered my uncle, regardless of her motivations. Poirot nodded understandingly. Yet her crime did, in its tragic way, force you all to confront difficult truths about the company's situation. That doesn't justify murder, Thomas Aldrich said firmly. Nothing could justify that. Certainly not. But human actions, even terrible ones, can sometimes produce unintended positive consequences. It is one of the cruel ironies of life. Dr. Hayes, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Do you think she planned for things to work out this way, that she somehow knew we would find a middle path? Non-doctor. I believe she planned only for Sir Reginald's death and her own escape from detection. The corporate resolution was achieved by all of you, working together in the aftermath of tragedy. She deserves no credit for your wisdom and collaboration. Margaret Whitmore looked thoughtful. In a strange way, losing Uncle Reggie forced us to truly listen to each other for the first time, before everything was filtered through his personality and preferences. And now you have learned to function as a true board of directors, rather than as courtiers attending a king. The conversation gradually shifted to lighter topics, the company's new projects, market developments, industry trends, but Poirot sensed an underlying question that none of them quite dared to ask directly. Finally, Vivian Cross found the courage to voice it. Monsieur Poirot, in your experience, how often do people resort to murder to solve what are essentially business problems? More often than one might expect, mademoiselle, but still relatively rarely. Most people, when faced with corporate conflicts, find legal and ethical solutions. It requires a particular combination of desperation, opportunity, and moral flexibility to cross that ultimate line. What made Catherine different? James asked. Several factors, I believe. Her long tenure gave her both intimate knowledge and a sense of ownership that exceeded her actual position. Her personal financial situation created desperation. Her husband's death had left her isolated and bitter, and her secretarial role had given her access to information and habits that she could exploit. Thomas Aldrich leaned forward. But surely many executives face similar pressures without resorting to murder. Indeed, the difference lies in character and circumstance. Catherine Hartwell had convinced herself that she was indispensable to the company, that her judgment was superior to everyone else's, including Sir Reginald's. When reality challenged that self-perception, she chose violence rather than acceptance. The meeting concluded with expressions of mutual respect and gratitude. As Poirot prepared to leave, James Pemberton walked him to the elevator. "Monsieur Poirot, may I ask you something personal?" "Certainement." "Do you ever feel burdened by the knowledge you carry, seeing into people's souls the way you do, understanding their capacity for both good and evil?" Poirot considered the question carefully. "It is both a gift and a burden, oui. But I have learned that most people, even those capable of terrible actions, are neither entirely good nor entirely evil. Catherine Hartwell was not a monster. She was a human being who made a monstrous choice. And that makes it somehow worse, doesn't it? The banality of evil, as someone once said. Perhaps, but it also makes redemption possible, even if it cannot undo the harm that has been done." As the elevator descended, Poirot reflected on the case that had brought him to this moment. The murder in the boardroom had been solved, justice had been served, and the surviving parties had found a way forward. But the deeper questions about power, loyalty, desperation, and the thin line between civilization and chaos, those questions would continue to haunt him. Stephen here, wrapping up another fascinating case from the archives of Hercule Poirot. The murder in the boardroom reminds us that the corporate world, for all its modern sophistication, remains fundamentally human, subject to the same passions, fears, and moral failings that have driven people to extreme actions throughout history. Catherine Hartwell's crime was solved not by advanced technology or complex deduction, but by careful observation of human nature and the small details that betrayed her guilt. The ink stain that she tried so desperately to wash away became the thread that, when pulled, unravelled her entire carefully constructed plan. Perhaps the most sobering aspect of this case is how easily it might have succeeded. In a world where corporate politics can be as ruthless as any battlefield, the line between aggressive business tactics and actual crime can sometimes blur. It takes wisdom, integrity, and a commitment to ethical behaviour to navigate these treacherous waters without losing one's moral compass. The surviving members of Pemberton Industries found that wisdom in the aftermath of tragedy, learning to work together and compromise in ways that honoured both Sir Reginald's legacy and the realities of modern business. Their success stands as a testament to the possibility of finding constructive solutions to even the most challenging corporate dilemmas. Until next time, this is Stephen reminding you that in the world of Hercule Poirot, justice may sometimes be delayed, but it is never denied. Thank you for joining us for another cozy mystery.